Hello and welcome back to Reviving an Idler. In this episode I'm hoping to come back to some of the issues we raised in the last episode, and we'll be looking at how I am going to go about repairing the planking that is able to be repaired, and I'll be making a cheap and nasty tool in order to help me accomplish this. Stay tuned. Yes, well, we are back in the boat this morning. It's about 5 AM, a beautiful, lovely day, and we're just going to have a quick catch up on where we left off. First of all, a big thank you to everybody who commented on the last video. It was a great help. A lot of original ideas there, a lot of tried and tested ideas, and a lot of support and help from you, which I really greatly appreciated. There was a lot of information on different techniques, and particularly people on polar opposite ends of the scale actually saying that things would work. So the take home from that for me was that there are a lot of options that I can try, a lot of things that I can do, and there is no right or wrong way. The main thing I gained from that little experiment was confidence in trying my idea, which I'm going to explain to you in a moment. But before I explain that, I think it's important to explain some of the issues surrounding plugging the planking. Now, when you have your planks laid along, every nail creates a hole in the plank, and a hole in a plank is essentially a weakness. Now, if you have multiple holes in a plank in too close together, you sufficiently weaken the sort of the flexibility of that plank, whether it's that way or that way. It potentially creates a fold line that it could break along. So you want to try and limit the amount of holes. Now that was a particular risk of doing, of moving the frames onto good wood, but then you still have two holes just next to them, so you want to try and avoid that if possible. The other thing which is of concern is the plugs themselves being pulled through the plank and allowing the plank to simply flap off the frame. The primary aim of these sawn frames is to tie the rest of the boat to the keel. So these have to be the most load bearing and the most solid parts of the boat. These steamed ribs here, they are largely just supporting the planking so that it doesn't spread apart too much under pressure from the caulking. They don't actually tie the sides of the boat to the keel in any way. They're just sitting into pockets, they're loose. And they provide some resistance against the boat being pushed in. They force the boats out. So these sawn frames need to be solid. They need to be able to hold the plank, the gunnels, the inwale, the bilge stringers solidly enough to the keel, to the floors, that there is no risk of the boat simply opening up at the bottom and sinking. So I believe it's very important that I do take the time to really figure out exactly how I am going to fix this. I appreciate that's a little tiring for some of you. I know we want to see more progress on the boat quicker, and I believe nobody knows that feeling more than I do. But I think if we take a few moments, just make sure we're getting that squared away, then I think we'll thank ourselves for that down the line. So the moment of truth, the idea. What are we going to do? So if you imagine we have our planking, it's going to be lining up, sort of a cross section of the planking is going to be a bit like that, etc, etc, and you've got your frame running down the inside. Now the damage we have is on the inside of the planking and the outside, and it's likely to run through the inside as well, so we need to remove a significant amount of material in here. Now a straight plug, even glued, has the potential for the plank to pull off and leave basically a frame with a plug nailed to it. So we don't really want that. My idea then is to use the same nail holes, thus reducing the amount of holes that I put into the plank, but I'm going to use a conical plug, like that. Now, the advantage of using a conical plug is that it can't be pulled through the plank. The negative is that it's essentially a wedge. So you're going to have this wedge in the planking, and at the edge over here, there's a risk that it then could potentially force the plank apart. However, it's going to go all the way through, so the flat end of the actual plug itself will be flush against the rib and nailed through, so that the wedging force is acting between the plug and the frame, not acting out against the plank. So that should mitigate that, so that the plank cannot be pulled off the nail and the plug cannot split the plank because it is forced up against the frame and nailed into position. And I will also then glue the actual plug into the planking as well, to allow us to have a good bond and a good seal in there as well, because I also want to try and improve the wood as well. There are some areas where the damage is too great, and even putting a plug in, or even putting two plugs in and running them back over themselves like that, is not going to cut it, and some of these planks will have to come out. As you know already, over on the port side of the boat there are 3 planks round about the bilges that need to be replaced, and there's 1 on the starboard side, and I think there's going to have to be another 2 on either side coming out due to iron rot issues that I can see at the moment. So making up the plugs themselves is the source of our next big delay. It's something around about a 12-week waiting list for the tools I need to actually do this. They were ordered 2 weeks ago, so only 10 weeks to go. If anybody knows of a Veritas 3/8 tenon cutter and reciprocal reamer that goes with it, I would love to know if they've got one for sale that I could buy a bit earlier than that to try and speed this process up, but that's what I'm looking at just now. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the old offcut planking, the stuff that is damaged, and where it is good I'm going to cut it into little blocks, glue them all together with resorcinol. And the reason they're little blocks glued together is because the grain is going to run that way to match the planking. So it's going to be a bit of a funny way to use this. I'll then, if that's your box section, I'll then cut the corners off, same as you were shaping a mast or a spar, until eventually we've got a circle or a little packet of Rolos or something. And then we'll feed that into our tenon cutter, which looks a little bit like this. And that has a blade sitting in here, just like a big pencil sharpener. And you feed your tuberolos into our pencil sharpener, and it shaves off a little cone, which we then cut out, stick into there, whack a nail through it, glue it in place, etc., and we have repaired that plank. That's my plan, that's the way going forward. The most difficult part of this operation is going to be trying to actually cut with basically around the grain, so there's a real risk we might chew up the grain and pull out pieces as we do this. So we'll have to use very sharp tools and go as carefully as we can to try and get this to work. But I need the grain direction to be the same on the plug as it is on the plank, because the plug is going to be made out of the same material as the plank, i.e. the pitch pine or the old pitch pine. It's going to be aged the same way, so it should swell and contract at the same rate as the planking that is already there, so we shouldn't have any real worries about this doing anything weird. shrinking and creating leaks or expanding excessively and splitting the planks. So it needs to have the same grain orientation, and it needs to be the same material as the existing planking. So that is my plan as it stands just now. Waiting on our tenon cutter and our reamer for cutting the relative cones. Let me know what you think of that idea. I think it's pretty bomb-proof. I don't think we're going to have any real issues with that, but if there's anything glaringly obvious that I've not either explained in this video or thought of, then please let me know about it. Always keen to hear your comments and your ideas. The next step going forward is we will make a tenon cutter, so I can actually make a start on a test piece, so I can actually try this out. I would also like to give a massive shout out to Mr. Webb, who's been following the channel and had this and decided that he would like to donate it to the restoration of Idler. Beautiful old mallet that he found at an auction in the local village, and it belonged to a shipwright from originally St Ives in Cornwall, and he'd moved to Plymouth and then later Barry in South Wales. That's about all we really know about this gentleman. If anybody recognises this mallet at all and goes, "That was my granddad's," then that would be fantastic. I would love to know who this belonged to and be able to hear a little bit more about their story as well. It's a beautiful old tool, and I'm really looking forward to getting it shipshape and being able to use it on the caulking. Massive thank you to Mr. Webb again. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the donation, and so does Idler. So in order to test out the plugging idea, I've got a bit of old planking from the boat. This is a part of a strake which is damaged anyway and will need to be replaced with a new plank. So I'm quite happy to use this piece as a tester. It's not part of the original planking, it is a repair piece, but it's been in the boat long enough that I think it's going to work as a good proxy for the rest of the planking. I also have a little section of rib stock. It's not been smoothed down and planed, but it's good enough to do the job as a tester. And I have a reaming tool. Looks like this. Now this is not the one that I need to go with the tenon cutter that I mentioned earlier. It's a cheaper, more widely available piece. I think it's primarily used for taking the burr out of cutting pipework and things, but it'll do the job just now. And the test is going to be like this. I will take this plank, I am going to ream out a hole here and a hole here, so we've got the plug, ream out here and here, so we've got two ribs essentially fastened. Make a cone plug, glue it into the hole and nail with our rows the ribstock to it. Now the tests that I'm going to try are primarily get them in, give it a good old wiggle, a shake, and just really try and just pull the plank away from the rib. If it passes that test, the next thing I want to see is, can I get it to split the wood? So I'm going to over tighten the nail and just see if I can just jam everything up and split the plank along the grain line. Passes that test, be a submersion test following, and I'm going to then soak this for a few days in a water trough and just see if I can either get the glue to fail or the plug to swell up and split, and the planking to split as well. Something like that, just to try and see if I can get a failure. And if it passes all those tests, I think you'll probably agree with me that the plugging, or this method of plugging, is going to be good enough to repair some of the holes in the planking that we do have. As I have already mentioned, there are planks in there which are going to be replaced. I'm not looking to do this with all the damaged areas. There are some areas that are too far gone, and we will be looking to repair them anyway. It's nice to save planking, but at the end of the day, planking is just planking. It's just an outer skin. It is to be considered as a consumable part of the boat anyway, so I'm not looking to save all of it, but anywhere I can save it, I would like to. So let's get into this and see what happens. So that's what we're looking at there. Little conical hole. Next thing we're going to need here is a quick and dirty tenon cutter. So I'm just using exactly the same reamer bit. I'm going to hollow out the cone size that I need, and then I'll be cutting a slice into the side and lining up a spoke shave blade so that it's just glancing across, so I can basically build a small pencil sharpener. So here is my very rough and ready tenon cutter. I've not even bothered to shape the bit of wood to make it a little bit less obvious that it's a piece of offcut. But we have a blade simply bolted in. A bit more time, I'd obviously take the edge of that off so that the cuttings can fall out a bit easier, and simply tighten down with a nut. Very ugly, very rough and ready, but we'll find out if it works in just a moment. So I'm using a bit of pitch pine from some of the furniture that was inside the boat. So it is the same wood. As you'll notice, the grain is running along this. Now I'm going to use this primarily for two reasons. Firstly, it's a lot easier and quicker to simply sharpen a stake into a plug shape. So it means for the testing I can go a bit quicker. It also is going to exert a greater force on the planking, because this will want to swell in an outwards direction. Like from that, it'll want to get bigger that way. which will exert greater force on the planking. So if I can put this in, nails, glues, etc., and it doesn't split the planking when it's like this on the soak test, then we know that when we actually come back to use the across the grain plugs, that we're going to have less risk of that happening as well. So that's the reason I'm going to be using that. So, moment of truth. Here's our big pencil sharpener, and I've roughly tapered this down with a spoke shave just to get it into the cutter first of all. I think we need to sharpen that blade a little bit. It's kind of munching rather than cutting, but the principle is sound. And there we have one hairy plug. So that'll do the job. That's given us a plug the same shape as the hole in the plank. And if we then pop that into the plank, you can see what we're looking at. Cut that off, glue it in place. Well, unfortunately, that's all I'm going to be able to show you for just now. Looking forward into the next episode, I'll be continuing the assembly of our test piece. We'll be testing it out and we'll be seeing what the results are. We may even get into the boat and have a look at these frames that are already in there and start fairing them down because they have shrunk enough that I think we can start getting them closer to their final shape. Also look at potentially fitting the floor as well. Before I can fasten any of the planks to these frames, I obviously have to have the plugs in place, but until I get the proper tenon cutter and reamer, there's not a great deal of pace I can put behind this. I will do what I can, I'll remove what planks I can, and we will be progressing slowly. There's also other frames that I can be taking out and taking the template off using these wonderful slabs of wood that I got yesterday.
So we're glad to have this oak, and hopefully we're going to get the majority of our remaining frames out of these slabs. The one on the bottom, which you can't quite see, is going to be correctly orientated for actually ripping down and getting some steamable ribs. So we may actually use this for steamed ribs rather than frames, but we'll see what we need more at the time as we come to it. I have taken your advice from the last episode and I've scaled up the size of the frames, so they should be round about 55mm, I think it was, and I've gone up to a full 70. So that gives us, well, if you use this old rib here, you can see straight away the difference in thickness. An example there. We're going to have a considerably thicker new frame going in. That's going to add a lot of strength. It's also going to add a little bit more space for taking fastenings, as I will be using nails, like roved nails, like what we're using on the steamed ribs. So my reasoning for using nails is primarily I can actually see the fastenings. So the nail will come through the planking, through the frame, and I can see the end of it. So if there's anything broken or twisted or rotten on the inside between the frame and the plank, this will become loose over time and I'll be able to see it wiggling and I'll know that that fastening is broken. It's also less likely to actually damage the planking or the frames themselves, as copper doesn't do that much damage as it corrodes. It's also significantly cheaper using roved nails than, say, bronze screws. The cheapest option would be your iron nails, but look where that got us. So we're going to go with something that's going to give us a really strong, really reliable result at a reasonable cost. So that's the reason for using the nails.
But in the meantime, thank you very, very much for liking, sharing and subscribing. Thank you so much for coming along and being part of my little adventure here. Huge shout out to my patrons who are doing a fantastic job of keeping the project afloat. And if you want to know more about how to become a patron and how to support the project in your own special way, please check out the links in the description below. For more regular updates, please check out my Instagram or my Facebook as well, as I like to post up stuff there fairly frequently. Many thanks from me just now, take it easy and I'll see you next time.